Thanks to everyone for coming out tonight, and thanks also to our 4 panelists for being here this evening for what I think will be a very exciting and important discussion about new feminist responses to street harassment. As you can tell by the enormous crowd in the room tonight, street harassment is an issue that affects many people, especially in urban settings like New York City. In particular, it affects women and queer and transgender people, and it crosses all kinds of lines of gender, race, and class. All of our speakers tonight have extensive experience thinking about issues of street harassment and gender-based violence, and they've created some really amazing models both here in New York City and in Washington, DC, to combat this type of violence. I'm going to introduce our panelists in the order that they'll be speaking. Each of them will talk about their work individually, and then the center's associate director, Catherine Sameh, will moderate them. And then at the end, we'll have plenty of time for your questions for the panelists. So our first speaker tonight is Emily May. She is a social entrepreneur and the co-founder of Hollaback, a movement to end street harassment, and New Yorkers for Safe Transit, a coalition dedicated to safe transit for all. Emily also has a master's degree from the London School of Economics, and she was recently selected as one of the 30 women making history by the Women's Media Center. Next, we'll have Oraia Reid. She is a social entrepreneur with over a decade of experience dedicated to social and political justice, women's rights, and empowering communities on behalf of LGBTQ communities. Her focus is on direct services to eradicate gender-based violence. She's the executive director of Right Rides for Women's Safety, an award-winning New York City nonprofit that she founded in 2004, whose mission is to create safer communities by ending sexual harassment and assault through direct services, safety, advocacy, and community organizing. Shenoy is co-founder of Hollaback DC, an online community-based organization whose aim is to educate and address public sexual harassment and assault. In addition to her work at Hollaback DC, Che is policy and technical assistance attorney at Break the Cycle and oversees policy initiatives that relate to how schools address dating violence and sexual violence. And finally, Shannon Lynberg is the co-founder of Hollaback DC. She's worked with various organizations to improve the lives of women and girls. In November 2008, Shannon was featured as one of tomorrow's leaders in O, the Oprah magazine. So please join me in welcoming our first panelist, Emily May.
All right, thank you so much for having me here. I want to thank the Center for Research on Women. I want to thank Lucy for the awesome introduction. I want to thank this totally packed room and my fellow panelists that inspire me every day. So before we get started, we kind of wanted to look a little bit at your experiences of street harassment. And we wanted to do it Hollaback style in a safe and comfortable and technological way. So if you want to take out your cell phone cameras and your cell phones, and you want to text to the number 22333 and answer this question if you've ever been groped in public. So no, you'll put in 4412 as your message, once is 4662, and more than once is 4682. So they're going to slide around a little bit, but it looks like the basic trend is about 60% of the people in this room have been groped at least once. 39% said no, never. 34% said once, and 27, maybe 28, it's edging over, said more than once. The next question is, have you ever experienced or witnessed public masturbation? Okay, so it's looking at like about 55% of you have experienced it either once or more than once, about 19% of you more than once, and 46% of you said no, that you hadn't experienced it. Let's do one last one talking about verbal harassment. So everybody's in the room has been street harassed at some point? 71% of you said often, 25% of you said more than once, and 3% of you said once. You know what? I've been running Hollaback for 5 years, and I've done this exercise quite a few times before we had Poll Everywhere and the wonder of the internet. We were raising hands and telling our stories. And every single time that I do it, it kind of sets me back and puts me on alarm. I don't know why I would expect that this would be the one time where I went somewhere and nobody had seen public masturbation and nobody had been verbally harassed. But I do, and I think that these statistics are really scary and really alarming. But they're not inconsistent with the statistics that we're seeing around the world. Our friend Holly Curl just wrote a book called Stop Street Harassment that showed that 80 to 100% of women internationally had experienced harassment at some point in their lives. Having done this work in New York City for 5 years, I can tell you're hard-pressed to find a woman in the city that's never experienced it in some capacity. And it was out of those experiences that we started Hollaback in 2005. It started out of a conversation with friends. We were in our early 20s at that point, and we really just wanted a response. I mean, with most kinds of injustice, you at least have a response, whether you do it or you don't. But with street harassment, there's no good response, or at least there wasn't in 2005. But we didn't just want any response, right? Because you can say stuff, and we wanted a really badass response. And so, I was getting street harassed 3 or 4 times a day, and street harassment taught me to be silent, to walk on, not to risk my life for the satisfaction of telling one turd off. So I shut up, and I walked on, and I pretended like it didn't hurt. And I believe that if I let it in and I let myself truly feel the hurt of street harassment, that it meant that I wasn't strong. But that wasn't the problem. The problem wasn't that I wasn't strong enough. It's not that you're not strong enough either. But carrying around hundreds of stories of street harassment around in one little heart starts to feel like kryptonite after a while. And so we started Hollaback. We were initially inspired by this incredible woman named Tal Nguyen. She's now on our board. And she was riding the subway in the Upper West Side, actually. She got onto the train. A man sat down across from her, pulled out his penis, and started masturbating. She pulled out her camera and discreetly took his picture. She took the picture to the police. If any of you have ever tried this, your experience might be the same. The police didn't care. She put it on Flickr, and then it eventually made it to the front page of the Daily News. We were totally blown away and inspired. This was like the Rosa Parks of street harassment before her time. And she turned the lens. I mean, she had, in that situation, she didn't have any of the power, right? She was young. Her family were immigrants. And she was a girl. And here was this mid-40s guy. He owned 2 raw foods restaurants, one of them named Quintessence, that used to be up here on the Upper West Side and is now still in the East Village. Gross. And she turned the lens on him, and not only did she eventually catch the guy, and was he prosecuted, but she ignited this citywide conversation about public masturbation. And all these women came forward so boldly, like you guys just came forward and said, you know what? This has happened to me too. My boss at the time actually recognized the guy and said, yes, I've seen that guy in particular masturbating on the subway. And so, we started Hollaback. In 2005, the cell phone camera was kind of new and the blogs were kind of new, and we thought it would be really badass to do what Tal Nguyen had done and run around the city, and except expanding the concept so it wasn't just public masturbation, but it also included groping and verbal harassment. I want to tell you the story about the first time I did it, because there's a really key question here that we get asked in different contexts, and it's really important that you understand it. And you know the impact that street harassment has on you in your life. You know the impact and the pervasiveness of street harassment. I don't have to convince you of that. You've already told yourselves that. But why Hollaback? Why does Hollaback matter, right? There's 2 answers to that. One is that it's personal. One is that it's for you. And the other one is that it's for the world, okay? So I want to talk about those 2 things. And I want to start off by talking about the personal aspect of it by telling the story of the first time that I Hollabacked. We had just started the site, and I was walking home from work on my street carrying all this stuff, because you know what always happens at the most awkward times ever. And this guy walked by and he looked at me and he sneered and he said, "Hey, beautiful, I'm gonna hit that." And then he looked at me and he sneered and he kind of laughed. And I did this, because that's what I did when I was street harassed. I hid. And then I was kind of like, oh crap, we just started the site. And so I did what any strong woman would do. I hid behind trash cans. And I pulled out my cell phone camera, and peering around the edge of those trash cans, those men were 3 blocks away, and I took their picture from very, very, very far away. And I held that picture in my hand like it was glowing green kryptonite. And I walked back to my apartment, and I tried to draft the blog post, and I rewrote it like 4 times before I finally submitted like the 3 sentences that I had decided on. And what I realized was that I was really scared, and I was safe at that point from the street harassment, but I was really scared that other people were going to think it was my fault. And that's a weird thing. I mean, I went through lots of women's studies classes. Like, why do I think this is my fault, right? And intellectually, I knew street harassment isn't my fault, and that this is part of a broader culture of sexism. It's part of a broader culture of violence against women. But my heart didn't know that. It was my head. And so in Hollaback for the first time, I really realized the extent to which I had blamed myself for all those years and all those hundreds of harassment experiences. And I let myself hurt for the first time. And then, next time I got street harassed, and I Hollabacked again, it hurt a little less, and I felt a little more badass. And today, when I Hollabacked, having done it a lot over the past 5 years, I feel like my most empowered, badass self. And an interesting thing happened. I don't know why it happened. I can't explain it. There's some dangerous assumptions if you want to go down those roads as to why. But I do want to tell you what happened. I Hollabacked. I was getting street harassed 3 or 4 times a day, and hauling back 3 or 4 times a day when we started. And within about 6 months, I stopped getting street harassed as much. I still get street harassed, but I stopped getting street harassed as much. And every single woman that we've had work on our project and respond to street harassment in a consistent way has had the same experience. So Hollaback is for you on a personal level, right? But we don't always do things for ourselves. Sometimes we do things for other people. The 10-year plan for Hollaback is for all these little baby girls rolling around in strollers to never have to experience street harassment the way that we've experienced it. And that's why Hollaback is for the world. And I know what you're thinking, right? If we want to change street harassment, we have to change this whole culture that makes gender-based violence okay. We have to change the whole thing. And you're right, we do. But you know what? Culture changes. Culture changes. In 60 years, we've gone from a culture that had different water fountains for people of color to a culture where we have our first African-American president. Culture changes, and it changes by people coming forward like Rosa Parks, like Tal Nguyen, like all of you, and telling their stories. And that is what Hollaback is about. Think about all the amazing people that have come forward, and how these stories that people have told, whether it's been Terry Schiavo or Rodney King, whether you're talking about the American Dream narrative, the welfare mom narrative, the deadbeat dad narrative, these are stories that not only shape our public consciousness, they change our culture. And so, with Hollaback, we have a brand new campfire, the internet. And for the first time in history, we have a really badass way to respond to harassment. And it's changing the game. Hollaback has been around for 5 years. I just came on full-time as executive director 5 months ago. Hollaback has sites internationally. We have 10 sites now. We're going to another 10 sites within the next 2 months, including places like Berlin, Buenos Aires, Hong Kong, Australia, Canada, Stockholm. And we're showing that street harassment matters in an international scope. And we're showing that we have a response. And we're showing that our response matters. So when I Hollaback, I do it for me, but I also do it for the world. I hope you'll join me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Oraia, and I'm the founder and executive director of Right Rights Women's Safety. I don't have any fancy presentations, so I'll just talk to y'all. My organization's mission is to build safer communities by addressing gender-based violence ranging from sexual harassment to assault. We're best known for our flagship Right Rides program, which is a free, safe, late-night ride home service that is entirely volunteer-run. We started off 6 years ago in just 3 neighborhoods with 2 volunteers and 1 privately owned car, wanting to make a difference in the increase in assaults targeting women walking home by themselves late at night. And we realized that there was such a need for services that are addressing public safety at the intersections of financial ability and safe access to transit. So over the years, we have grown Right Rides. We're now in 45 neighborhoods across 4 boroughs. We recently drove home our 3,000th rider. We have some 200 volunteers and a partnership with Zipcar. And in addition to the Ride Home program, we also have other safety advocacy work that we're doing. Along with Emily and various other groups in New York City, we have started New Yorkers for Safe Transit, which is a coalition to address gender-based violence in mass transit. I don't know if you've seen the ads in the subway that say sexual harassment's a crime in the subway too, or heard the audio announcements, but that's work that we have done. And we're really looking at growing this work because it is so important, and the time is right to take a stand against gender-based violence, especially sexual harassment. So I'm very excited to see you all here today because it's obviously something you care about too. And then along with Emily, well, I actually want to sort of tell the story of how it all sort of came down. So sometime in the summer of 2009, Emily and Holly and I were having brunch. Holly wrote the book that she mentioned, Stop Street Harassment, which is awesome, and you definitely have to pick it up. It just came out. It's on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com. And Emily and I also wrote the foreword to that book. So over lunch, we're talking about what is going to be the next response to street harassment. Emily's blog, the Hollaback blog, had been some 4 or 5 years old. Right Rides had some years under its belt, some great work done in the local community, some partnerships were forged. But we knew that in order to take this work to the next level, we really needed to change the game, so to speak. And we're all sitting around and we've got our, mobile phones out on the table, and we're thinking like, wow, what can we do to leverage mobile technology? And then it just sort of all fit into place. Like why everyone now has cell phones and many own smartphones, and there's fancy little things called apps. And what if we made one? What if we put together like 2 and 2 together and really leverage a ubiquitous technology for us, for community good? And so we mobilized very quickly and got together a team of developers and designers, and we created the Hollaback app, which is still pending right now in the Apple Store. It has also been replicated for Droid, and I will talk on the SMS texting part in a second. But what we wanted to do, what we envisioned, was a safe, easy, and empowering way, a very direct way of addressing gender-based violence, sexual harassment in public spaces in that moment, because oftentimes, as you may have experienced or know folks who have experienced sexual harassment, there really is, your responses are very limited as a person today working within the current systems that we have. Your choice is either to kind of ignore it and walk on, and you sort of feel victimized, or maybe you yell at the harasser, hey, that's not cool, I don't appreciate that. You try to give them some education, but that could escalate the situation. And then all of a sudden, you're in this situation that, it's just sort of double victimizing, I feel like, in many ways. It doesn't feel great. And so we built this app to have a very safe, easy, and empowering and anonymous response to gender-based violence. And the app will tie in real time to a map, so dropping pins on a map as your Hollaback is received. The system will send you an email after you have submitted your little Hollaback, saying, if you have a story and you wish to share it, please let us know. And if you have photos you'd like to upload, please do so. And we believe that this is so important because for the first time, it will start capturing data that is just not otherwise able to be captured right now. In my own personal experience, even if I choose to approach a police officer or some law enforcement authority, if I'm in the subway, an MTA person, Oftentimes they don't believe me, or they just don't want to be bothered, or their response is, oh, well, the person's long gone, can you prove it? And the thing is that, more times than not, it just becomes a frustrating experience. And so we're really hoping that with the launch of this app, that it will really change the game. And we will launch it in New York City and then hopefully take it internationally as resources permit. And we are working with groups in other countries, namely Harassment Project, who are doing similar work around SMS, so the texting functions. For us, it made more fiscal sense to launch it onto an iPhone and a Droid model first, but we very much want to make the technology available for all those who have different levels of access to mobile phones. So it's very exciting to be doing this work now, because I believe that addressing street harassment or harassment in public spaces is really the cornerstone issue for this generation, much like workplace harassment was some 20, 30 years ago. It took a few brave people to come forward and say enough is enough. We're going to mobilize resources. We're going to change some laws. And now it is so highly illegal to harass in the workplace that employers wouldn't even dream of letting that behavior happen. But yet our streets are not safe. Our mass transit isn't safe. So we're really hoping to change that. And I also want to encourage all of you. I didn't go to school for this. I am just like the average person who wanted to do something and was just it felt so important. It's just so timely, and that it had to be done. And I encourage all of you to consider ways that you can make similar shifts in your communities, in similar ways that you can affect change in whatever small way, because small ways lead to great ways. And just by talking and sharing and mobilizing your own efforts, you can do really amazing things. So I look forward to discussing more of this and your questions later.
Thank you so much for having us here. We're really honored to be part of this discussion. My name's Che, and
I'm Shannon.
And we are the co-founders of Hollaback DC. And a lot of the work that was being done here in New York City was not being done in DC around street harassment. And both of us are going to share kind of our personal stories of why we came to this movement and why we're starting a collective action for safe spaces in DC. DC is an amazing city. It's a great city to be in. It's a great city for public transportation. And I was up here in New York City working for the borough president of Manhattan, and realized that one of the things that we don't really talk about, but advice given to people that move to New York City, is be careful on the subway. I'm like, all right, I'll be careful on the subway. How many of you have gotten that advice? Right, everyone. All the women in this room have gotten that advice at one point or another when they moved up to New York City or became an adult in New York City. And so one of the things that I started to think about was why is that the advice that you're given, not the hundreds other pieces of advice. And there I was sitting on the train coming back from Brooklyn, or going into Manhattan from Brooklyn, and I'm sitting with my intern, who was an intern at Barnard, went to Barnard, and she was interning for us, and she told me the story of how her roommate had just witnessed that past weekend a rape of a woman on the subway. And she saw it. It was in another car. She ran out of the station to get a station manager to assist, to stop the train. She told the conductor that these guys were blocking the exit of the rape survivor, and the train kept moving, and it left. So we don't know what happened to the survivor, and I don't think that it was ever reported in any of the media outlets. And so there's somebody out there who now probably will never be able to use public transportation without conjuring up images of what occurred to her. And so that kind of, again, tied this advice to tangible evidence that something is happening on the subway, and then proposed this idea of surveying women and
people who use the public transportation system to see how much public sexual harassment happens. And that's how I got connected to Hollaback, New York City, and to Right Rides. And it was awesome because there's not a lot of information out there in terms of research. And this was like the tip of the iceberg. It wasn't like a full-fledged research project, which I hope one of you or many of you end up doing for small organizations like us, because we don't have a lot of money to do it. But it was like it was so eye-opening for this politician, and realized that there's a lot of traction for this issue. And so when I moved to DC, and one of the things that I forgot to make the link. One of the things that what I learned from the research was that DC was the model. DC was the safest subway system out there when you compare it internationally, when you compare it domestically. And that's because DC's subway system was built in the late 1970s. So they were taking all the urban planning and all the issues that other cities had, and were really implementing it to make sure that we weren't doing that in DC. Come down to DC, and my first metro ride in DC, a man exposed himself to me. I was like, holy shit. Like, what has happened? And here I was again, kind of like what Emily said, totally empowered chick, like totally thought I was badass. And then this man exposes himself to me. I'm on an empty car train. And again, DC has a transit police. We have cell phone coverage everywhere except in small portions of our subway system. And I didn't even think to do anything. I was petrified. And then because I wasn't giving him attention, he walked, once we got to another metro stop, he walked out and went into the next car. So again, here's this man walking in DC and probably exposing himself and getting off on the fact that he's exposing himself to women and children. I have no idea who he's exposing himself to. So that's kind of my story of how I felt so revved up that we needed to do something about it. And here I was kind of from like a research policy perspective working on it, and realizing that I moved to a city that was supposed to be the model, and I'm sure I'm one of thousands of women and queer individuals that have been publicly sexually harassed and assaulted in DC, but there was really no outlet for it. And so let me pause there, and Shannon's going to share her story.
So I grew up in Atlanta, and I experienced street harassment since probably middle school, but it looked differently. It would happen, you know, in businesses, especially when I started working. I'd get harassed by people coming in while I was working. I worked in a coffee shop, so all the time customers would come in, especially older men, and they'd harass me, and there was nothing I could do. I talked to my boss about it, and she would say, oh, they're just being men, they're pigs, just let it go. And I would get in trouble if I ever tried to respond to them, and she would, you know, threaten to fire me and stuff. So I kind of just started letting it roll off my back. And then I would get harassed driving around in traffic in Atlanta, sitting in traffic. You know, a group of guys next to me would honk their horns, or truckers would honk their horns and try and get my attention. And then I moved to DC. I left my car in Atlanta. I was all excited about using public transportation, walking to work, walking all over the place. And the first apartment I lived in DC, in order to get home from work, after I got off the metro, I had to walk through this park. And there was always people hanging out in this park. And every day I would get harassed incessantly walking home. And every woman walking through that park would get harassed. Here I am working at a national women's organization. I consider myself an empowered feminist. And how do I respond to the street harassment? I call my mom. Every day walking home from work, I'm calling my mom. And my mom's going, well, I love hearing from you, but I don't like that the only time you're calling me now is because you're feeling unsafe walking through a park, and I don't like the idea of you walking through this park, and I'm imagining all these horrible things happening to you. And I would call her so much that she knew if I called her, she's like, are you walking through that park? And I just never had the courage to say anything. And one time, one incident that really stands out in my mind is that it was raining, and I always felt kind of protected under my umbrella when it was raining, you know, because you're kind of hidden and people aren't making as much eye contact. I always felt like I was a little bit safer. And then one day this guy was going, hey baby, hey sexy, I like that dress, and I was just ignoring him as usual. And I probably tried to call my mom, but she's probably busy with work or something, and he got up underneath my umbrella. And I didn't know what to do. I mean, there were people around me, no one stepped in to help me, and I kind of just like scurried away as fast as I could, but I didn't say anything to him. And after that, I just really started thinking about street harassment and how I could be involved with this, but I never did anything about it because there wasn't an outlet. And then Che's now going to share with you how we joined forces together.
So we actually met at DC Rape Crisis Center because both of our kind of feminist routes took us there and realized that we really wanted to do something about the prevalence of sexual assault in DC. And unlike New York City, where you do have some of these outlets, and there's so much mobilization that needs to be done in New York City around these issues, there was really nothing in DC to be creating that movement. And at least that's how we felt. And so we came to DCRCC, and we actually got trained by an individual named Martha Langland, who was one of the foremost prominent feminist authors around street harassment back in the 1980s. She's a professor at American University in gender studies, and she wrote this book called Back Off, Confronting Harassment, and she looks at both harassment at the workplace and harassment in public space, and wrote a phenomenal book in the 1990s that we really suggest, and we get a lot of our inspiration from her. And she came and did an entire training on street harassment. How do you address it in a nonviolent way? And how do you get your control and how do you feel empowered? And so from that, we realized that we have a lot of these same experiences, these same stories, these same feelings of vulnerability of walking through a park or taking a public transportation, and we needed to do something about it. And so we created Hollaback DC, and we felt for prior to starting it, we were like, it's just going to be an online thing. We're just going to get submissions. It's not going to be a big deal. Lo and behold, in April 2009, when we launched it, we got so many submissions and so many emails from women and queer individuals all over the DC metro area saying, thank you for doing this, and can we do a lot more activism around it? So we were like, yeah, sure, let's do something about it. And we are now creating a nonprofit around trying to create safer spaces and working with the queer communities and feminist communities, and trying to think about transit justice and think about safe spaces in a way that really challenges urban planning and really challenges a lot of the stereotypes that we have. DC is going through major gentrification right now, and we think that this is a prime opportunity to do it. We also feel really strongly about connecting the online and offline activism, and we'll talk to you. We'll show you some of the stuff that we're doing online, and some of the offline activism is bringing Right Rides of New York City to DC, because our metro shuts down at 2 a.m. and on the weekends, and it shuts down at 12 on the weeknights. So a large swath of our community can't really use public transportation. Our taxi cab rides are $3.75 starting, and just to get 7 miles or less than that, it costs around $20 for an individual to take a taxi. And Shannon and I, being rape crisis counselors, have worked, unfortunately, with a lot of individuals who were sexually assaulted by taxi cab drivers. So we know that these solutions that are already there aren't real solutions for our population that we cater to and that we are embedded and trusted in. So that's kind of, we're doing a lot of community forums, and we do a lot of community education at universities and at different feminist gatherings and queer gatherings to talk about nonviolent strategies to address street harassment. We're trying to work with our public transportation to do a lot more trainings with them. So that's kind of snippets of the offline activism, and now Shannon will talk about the online.
So I'm just going to show you what we've been doing online. Like Shay mentioned, we started our blog in April of 2009, and this is what our blog looks like. We use I don't know how to zoom out this. so you can see kind of. So we collect submissions, and when we first started the blog, we created a Gmail account, dchollaback@gmail.com, and we asked people, we sent out this massive email to all of our friends, all of our contacts, and said, we're starting this blog, please email us your experiences. And we weren't really getting a lot, so we started thinking about why are we not getting a ton of experiences? Like, we know that everyone we know has been harassed, so you would think they would just be sending it. So we thought, let's just try creating an online form where people can submit their experiences anonymously, and then they don't have to, it doesn't have to be tied to their email. And I'm going to show you that as soon as I can bring it up. So we use this site called WAFU, which is a really great site. It's free, and it allows people to submit their experience without being tied to any email. So we ask for specific things. We want to know, where did the harassment happen? So there's a space for them to fill out the cross streets. We ask, did it happen in DC, Virginia, or Maryland? Because DC is unique in that, you know, you can live in Virginia or Maryland but work in DC or vice versa and commute in, and it takes, 20 minutes. So we want to know where exactly it happened. We want to know, where did it occur, on the street, at a bar, in the metro station, at a bus stop, or other. And then if they select other, there's a place for them to do it. We want to know if it happened in the metro, what station did it happen on? Did it happen on the platform? Did it happen on the train? What line did it happen on? If it happened on a bus, what bus number? If it happened at a bus stop, where exactly? We want to know all of that information. We also want to know, what time did it happen? We want to know morning, rush hour, afternoon, night, late night, and then there's finally a box for them to submit their experience and type whatever they want. Then at the end, we have the optional sign your name or initials, or you can leave it blank for anonymous. Sometimes people give us their full name, sometimes they give us initials, sometimes they pick something like tired of street harassment, or anything like that. So after we get that, whatever anyone submits gets sent to our Gmail account. Then we post it on our blog. Then we tweet about it. Then we put it on Facebook, which I think I brought up. Here it is. So those are methods of getting it out. And these have proven really successful for us, especially with Twitter. Che is in charge of our Twitter account. She's done a really great job. Because of Twitter, we've been able to really increase the number of hits we've been getting, increase the number of people submitting experiences. We've gotten to speak out a lot of different things, meet a lot of great people within our community that want to help us work on this with things that we don't have time to do or money to do. Then, after we posted on our blog, we posted on this map. And we've been posting on a map since we started. Let me see if I can show you a little bit better. So this is just kind of, scroll out a little bit. So you can zoom in to see specifically what neighborhoods, but this is just a general overview. And then you can scroll over each pin and the story will pop up, should pop up. Just like that. So you can also see exactly what the experience is, where it happened. And our vision for creating this map was we felt like, a blog is great, people will read it, but it doesn't really give you the overall picture of how huge this problem is. And we thought a great way to do that was to have a map. So you can look at this map and you go, wow, that's a lot of street harassment. And this map, that was our vision, was to illustrate what a problem it's been. And a lot of people have used it for other purposes, like figuring out if they want to walk a different way, or looking to see when they're moving, like what neighborhoods are we getting a lot of experiences submitted to. This map has a couple of different uses, but we're using the data from our map and our blog to design our offline programs, like Right Rides. Where are we going to launch Right Rides and really do a lot of outreach? We're looking at these neighborhoods, we're looking at a lot of different stats and figuring that out. We're working with small businesses, we're looking exactly what streets are around that area. Are there a lot of bars? What small businesses are there? And we're reaching out to them and figuring out how we can work with them to really reduce the street harassment that's happening.
So it's one story impacts everything that we do. One experience impacts everything that we do. And it's also one experience gets put on a map and it gets distributed to hundreds and thousands of people that are reading our Twitter, our Facebook, and then eventually come to the blog to show support and to also share their experiences around street harassment. So really creating a dialogue and trying to engage more and more people who don't normally think about these issues and don't normally come to these types of events, to really think about how do we make those cultural norm shifts, and also at the same time create safety for individuals who identify as women or LGBTQ to really feel like DC's their home and not feel unsafe. So, thanks.
So join me in thanking the panelists once again. I'm Catherine Sameh, the Associate Director of the Barnard Center for Research on Women. And I think we'll start with maybe having you talk a little bit to each other, any initial responses, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. I'm sure you have many questions, very powerful presentations. So are there any initial, and sort of hearing each other's presentations, you talk to each other obviously a lot, but anything that struck you in terms of initial responses to each other?
We talk to each other a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can pose maybe some frames. I was very struck, Emily, by what you said at the beginning, that part of your project, in addition to the concrete things that you're doing, is really trying to shift the culture. And I'm wondering if maybe you all want to talk a little bit about sort of how you see that happening and why that is so important.
When we started this work 6 years ago for my organization, there was most certainly a sense in the communities where I lived and worked that New York City is so much safer now, and I can get to and from at any time of day with safety and security, and I certainly had felt that as well. And then over the course of one summer, that really changed. It really felt that people were being targeted, women were being targeted in my community. And as I got to speaking with friends about this, it really became apparent that they were learning about assaults in their own communities. And I think that to the culture shift point is that by raising awareness and by fostering conversations with others, it's really shifting definitions and fostering dialogue that wouldn't have otherwise happened. And so that's something that, in addition to serving thousands of people now and mobilizing hundreds of volunteers to get back into this work, I think that it's truly putting these issues at the forefront that weren't otherwise necessarily discussed publicly.
And I know I talked about it being about stories, and it is so much about stories, but we're already starting to see some really powerful outcomes from how stories are changing everything. One example of that is, after a couple years of collecting these stories, politicians got a little worried, the MTA got a little worried, and Oraia and I band together to start New Yorkers for Safe Transit, and your stories combined with our hustle got the anti-harassment ads that are up in the subways right now. And I also have to plug this Thursday. This is like a historical moment. I mean, as you know from studying this stuff, and as you will see tonight, street harassment, the movement is still really in its infancy. We're still kind of at that same point that, when women were trying to get the right to vote, everybody was going to them and being like, really? If you didn't like the way your husband voted, then why'd you marry him? But we're moving quickly, and as Oraia said, street harassment's poised to be the next big women's issue of the coming decade, and New York City is on top of it. The New York City Council just announced that they're having a hearing on street harassment for women and girls this Thursday at 1 p.m. at City Hall, and we have already gotten a couple high school students to come forward and speak about their experiences, and I would encourage everyone to come out and to tell their story.
One of the things that Shannon and I are trying to be very cognizant about is also to bring male allies into this. Again, if you look around the room, and I know that we're at Barnard and we're at a women's college, but it is all women except a few male individuals, and I think that is very challenging for us, to think about cultural norm change and be only talking to the marginalized community, or to 50% of the population who actually believe, some of those individuals who believe that this is not an issue. Like, you know, just it is about the clothing you wear, it is about what you look like. And we actually had a woman at one of our community forums who said that because she's no longer street harassed, she feels ugly. Mm-hmm. Well, that was deep, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what do you do with that information? Mm-hmm. Where do you go with that? And this isn't, you know, she identifies as a feminist, she identifies as, you know, a woman, a strong woman, and here she was saying, but on the flip side, when I'm not street harassed or when nobody's like hollering at me, I feel ugly. And we were like, wow, that's also cultural norm change. Like, how do we redefine beauty? How do we, you know, and there's probably 10 panels around that already. But that, you know, on top of that, we're also thinking about how do we get males involved in this fight, because the males that we have talked to who have come to our community education forums are often blown away about how the things that they're doing or what they see, and how we have defined that as street harassment, and how a lot of the people who submit to us subjectively feel that that's street harassment to them. And they're like, well, this is how we talk. This is what we're told to talk to you all like this. So how do we make those shifts? And we're, you know, trying to work very closely with Men Could Stop Rape to talk about these issues with their male clubs, the most clubs, Men of Strength clubs that they have in DC, and work with the high school students. And Shannon's been doing a lot of work with that.
Yeah, so one of the things that Che and I have seen from the very beginning as an important part of this cultural shift that needs to happen is working with the youth. So actually the first grant that we ever received, and the only grant to date, has been a grant to really understand street harassment and public sexual harassment in the youth communities in DC, and to write a report on that. And then from that information that we gain from them, to design tailored workshops to give to youth on street harassment. And we've just done a couple so far, but we'll probably have about 6 or 7 when we finish. And what we've learned so far is that this is such a normal behavior in the populations from middle school to high schoolers that they view it as okay. They're like, you know, we asked one focus group, have you ever harassed someone? And they all said, yeah, all the time. It's what you do. It's like you do it on the trains. It's what we do while we're waiting for our train. And it's so normal to them that it's okay. And they didn't even really recognize that this was a problem until we finished the focus group. And they're like, I never thought about this before. Like, now I realize that this isn't okay. And you know, and they've all experienced it from such a young age, especially growing up in DC, that it's just so internalized and so normal to them that they're going to become perpetrators, they can continue to be perpetrators. So we really view the youth as the place that we need to start with this cultural shift. So it's really interesting. It's a little bit disheartening sometimes to learn what they have to say, but we're hoping that with a bunch of workshops, and hopefully one day it'll be a part of school programming to have these workshops that they'll have to do, learn about public sexual harassment, that will start to change. It is, and I think the best way to start is always just with a general conversation, like why do you think that's okay? Like what if that was your mom or your sister is usually helpful. Mm-hmm. I think that, you know, it's not just going to get through to them with one conversation, but it's going to be continued conversations, and it definitely is a challenge. But yeah, I think for a lot of youth, the mom and sister thing is helpful if, you know, especially if they have like a younger sister. We haven't developed them yet. So we're in the first phase of our grant right now. We're doing the research, which will be done in January, and then we're going to start doing workshops. And once they are, you know, if you want to share your contact information with us afterwards, I'd be happy to share them with you and any other resources that we have.
And we should probably interject and say Hollaback's Twitter feed is at Hollaback if you're tweeting tonight, and DC is at Hollaback DC.
Great. Okay. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Beatrice, and I'm so happy that you're having this panel tonight. I actually live and work in Washington Heights here in Northern Manhattan. So this is my first time hearing about Hollaback. I didn't know about your project. I'm very excited that these things are happening. In my community, if you got anybody posting, is I think the highest level of street harassment anywhere in New York City. I am Dominican, and I can say it that it's very socially acceptable for Dominican men to come on to women in a very nasty and aggressive way. Little boys are trained to do this. I appreciate the comment that you made about this woman that feels ugly after people stop harassing her. The challenge for me is, as a resident, as a woman, as a feminist that works for a feminist organization in Washington Heights, how acceptable it is, how young girls are being harassed, older men harassing girls that they know are not past 15, and how the girls are trained to seek out this type of attention. It's really overwhelming because sometimes I get involved and I try to stop an older man from harassing a girl, but the girl is seeking out this behavior too. It goes both ways because that's the only positive feedback in some way that she's getting. So how do we address this from the perspective of, changing the behavior of the guys that are doing this, but how do we educate these young women that this is not okay, that this is not really referring to their beauty at all? Yeah. And in a community that is so prevalent and is so socially acceptable to have this behavior, how do we deal with this? Because it's overwhelming to me.
I actually used to live and work at different points in my life in Washington Heights at Northern Manhattan Improvement Corporation. So I'm familiar with the community. And I kind of want to take your question in two parts. I think one was sort of, is street harassment cultural, was one thing that you wanted to bring up. And the other part of it was, how do we convince girls to have self-respect? And on the issue of, is street harassment cultural, we get this all the time. Right before I was here, I was actually doing an interview with CW11, and it was not about street harassment being cultural at all, and they brought it up. And I think it's a really common myth, and what we're seeing is that street harassment exists in every culture across the world. It doesn't seem to just be like one person's culture. And although Washington Heights may be a Dominican neighborhood, and so most of the people who are harassing you are Dominican, we're seeing it in really high rates in traditionally white communities as well. And as well as every other culture known to man. And we're seeing it across the world. And I think the idea and this myth that's perpetuated about it just being one kind of culture tends to be a code word for it. When we talk about culture, oftentimes it tends to be a code word for men of color. And I think that it perpetuates a myth that men of color are sexual predators. And that's certainly no myth that we want to perpetuate here at Hollaback. The other piece of what you were saying is, how do we empower young girls? When I was working in Washington Heights, I had a coworker that I was talking to, and she said very much what you were saying. She said, my daughter is 10 years old, and or 11 years old, and she's at that age where she's deciding whether or not she's going to be a slut. And street harassment is influencing her decision and all of her friends' decisions on that, because this is the first time that they've ever heard a compliment. Now, that compliment may be, hey, baby, nice bleep. I want to bleep you in your bleep. But it's still the closest thing they've heard to a compliment. And that's a big question. I mean, that is a big, important, huge question that I'm sure your organization, I don't know what it is, but it's working to address. There are many organizations that are working to address that. And it's complex. But I think sending out the message that street harassment isn't okay and it isn't a compliment is just as important for women at this stage in the game as it is for men to hear. Because, I think all of us internalize it and process it in a different way. And it's hard to disassociate it with our own perspectives on ourselves.
Does anyone else want to respond?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is so complicated, and I think what you're doing and standing up for the girls when you see that harassment, it's a lot, right? It's a lot for providers to do that, and especially if you see it daily and probably hourly, to be constantly doing that. But I personally would push you to continue doing that work, because you're probably one of the few people in her life or in their lives that are actually addressing something that is so pervasive in their everyday. So seeing that, why are you not okay with it, and creating those conversations about how you found your beauty and how all the other, feminists in your organization found their beauty, I think will really kind of stir that, because a lot of young girls don't talk about it. We had a 14-year-old high school intern working for us through her school, trying to get school credit, and it was the same thing. She said that her girls and her get harassed all the time. They never put a name to it until she started interning for us and saw the videos, the literature, the experiences that she was getting, and she was tasked to take those experiences and put it on our blog, and kind of like learning how to use technology for social good. And it really changed her mindset immediately. She wrote an op-ed 3 months later that got published in the Washington Examiner about how 14-year-olds are being street harassed, and we don't like it. It was just like, from day one, it was like, oh, this is how it is. I don't understand the big deal. 3 months later, here's a shift that we saw. And so I think, a lot of it was just pure education and kind of not even like lecturing. It was just like, here's all the stuff that you can read about and read it and ask us if you have questions. And then we did create dialogue with her, and Shannon and her sat down so often to talk about these issues and to figure out ways that she as a 14-year-old can be empowered to address a 22-year-old man who has a car and has the ability to say things to her that she didn't know at that point was disrespectful, and now she's learning about it more.
Other questions? Yes.
So recently I had a friend who was walking in Brooklyn at night in a pretty deserted area, and a guy was catcalling her from across the street really loudly. And so he finally confronted her, and she responded back. And the episode ended with him smashing her head against an iron grate repeatedly. And when she fell down, he kicked her on the side and then stole her phone and then ran off. And I was wondering, how do you respond when you feel or fear that you will elicit that kind of violent reaction? And I also worry for her safety, and I'm proud that she responded, but at the same time, I also worry that from now on she'll just hide.
I mean, just first of all, it's deeply scary, and I'm very sorry to hear that. I think that, and I'll let others speak, but when we founded Hollaback, we founded it because we were scared to respond, because in certain situations we would see the situation escalate, and the impact wasn't always big enough for me anyway. It was like one person. Maybe I convinced one person, that it wasn't okay, but I wanted to convince millions of people that it wasn't okay. And so, we don't always encourage in every situation approaching the guy or taking a picture. I mean, sometimes it's enough to just tell your story online. But I don't know. I'm just very sorry to hear that.
We get that question all the time. Like, so many experiences at our community forums that we do are this exact scenario, and it silences us, because that's exactly what they're trying to do, is trying to silence us and not address this issue.
Yeah. It's a tough question. One thing that Che and I do is that we do trainings on how to respond to a harasser in a nonviolent verbal way. And we always preface it by telling everyone that, be your own best judge of your own safety. Really look around your surroundings. Do you feel safe? Do you feel comfortable? Who's around you? And all of that before you ever do anything, because there's no way to ever tell when it's going to escalate. You never know. And, we've both gone through different self-defense mechanisms and trainings and stuff like that for if things escalate, but you never even know with that either. So it's a hard question. Yeah.
And I think it speaks to how street harassment is on a spectrum of gender-based violence. I mean, it's at the lower end of the totem pole, but in that situation, it absolutely escalated. There was a pregnant woman run over by a car on Varick Street a year ago in DC. Some woman didn't respond at all to street harassment, and she got shot in the foot. And I think that it's part of this continuum. And if people street harass out on the street in public with everybody watching them, what do they do in a dark alley, and what do they do in their home? And my hope is that if we can really take on street harassment at this very sort of beginning level of the trajectory, that we'll be able to take on and address all these other forms of gender-based violence as well.
I saw a hand here and then another hand here, so go ahead. Oh, you. Oh, you're waiting for the mic. Great.
Hi, I am actually a rape crisis advocate myself. I was at St. Vin's, and now that they're closed, I'm moving to St. Luke's. Had a very interesting experience. I was at the Columbia bookstore the other day, and I come to the front counter, and here are all these books that are impulse buy books. And 3 or 4 of them were on the fine art and science, apparently, of picking up women. And what I found really, 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 really disconcerting is that among them, one of them described us as targets, not people, not women, targets. I probably don't have to tell you guys that that is precisely the terminology that rapists use. Yep. And I spoke with the buying manager, and she's actually a woman, and she said, I can't stand this, but I have no choice, and this is national policy for every Barnes & Noble in the country. So a freshman boy comes to the Columbia University bookstore in September, buys his books for his first semester, and what does he see about how to relate to women? Yep. She actually told me that one of them, I hope they serve beer in hell, is essentially a guide for date rape. I feel like there needs to be something done about this, at least even if it's just in our bookstore. This is not appropriate. And yet I have no idea what to do, and how does one organize something around this?
Well, in the case of us persuading the MTA to release the ads, we actually, and to answer your question in a little bit more long-winded fashion, in 2008 we found out that from the borough president's 2000 subway safety report that Che took an integral part in creating, one of the recommendations was a PSA campaign. I mean, it makes sense if we're talking about it, and we have a way of empowering people to respond, then people will be responding, and hopefully we will start to get a better picture of what's going on. The MTA shelved the campaign for fear that it would provoke offenders to act. And when we found out about this in 2008, we were outraged, much like you are also outraged. And and for absolutely good reason. And what we did was essentially speak with elected officials that we knew also cared about these issues, and in essence pressured the MTA with a very large media campaign, including what would culminate in a press conference. And the ads were up within 30 days. So I would certainly love to speak with you, about mobilizing media to make an impact. It really has made an impact.
And a key part of that campaign was an op-ed and that we wrote for the Daily News, and I'm happy to work with you to help get that published and give you some contact information for some people. Op-eds are the second most read thing after the front page, and 90% of them are submitted by men, so your voice is welcome.
Thank you. One of the things that I wanted to say, as members of a community, is that we need to start taking care of and protecting each other. And I'm really sorry to hear about your friend. I don't know what situation she was in, but I think that a lot of times when it's not happening to us directly and we see things happening to other people, we kind of tend to look the other way or keep going. in our daily routines. And I think that's the part where, you know, people are enabled by that or empowered by that because they feel as though they can get away with things. I was, just to share 2 quick stories, it's just amazing how this happens, or how often it happens. I was going home one day last week to a Yankee game, and there was a young man on the train, on the D train, who was a cross-dresser. So I'm not going to, you know, label or identify, but there were 4 men standing around him, making fun of him and saying that, you know, making fun of gay people. They weren't directly talking to him, but all of a sudden the conversation wasn't about baseball anymore, it was about gay people. And he was sitting there the entire time like this, like you can tell he was really mortified. So I went over to him and pretended I knew him. Mm-hmm. And, you know, glared at the guys and said, you know, this is not appropriate conversation, and asked him how he was doing, and he said he was doing fine. And a couple minutes later, you know, they got off the train, his head was still down, but when I got off the train, he said thank you, because people need to know that that's not acceptable and that they're not alone. So I think that's very, very important. When you hear that kind of street calling or harassment, you know, and it's not happening to you or it's happening to some little girl, you need to walk to the, I mean, even if you can't, even if it's not a safe environment, to say something to the person, to let that person know that they have someone there for them and to try to protect them, because it's a very scary situation. Something else that happened to me this summer, I went on vacation to Nassau, and you know how you have transportation from your airport to the hotel? Mm-hmm. I was on a bus with like maybe 20 other people. There were maybe only 10 people left at the time. There was a man sitting across from me, and he had a child with him, and he was masturbating while he was sitting there. I didn't know what to do. I told the bus driver, it was in another country, the bus driver didn't say anything. I realized that the man was with 2 other people, and so one was a man, one was a woman. I told the woman what was going on. It turns out that that was her brother. So she was very shocked, and I said, I'm not lying, this is really what's happening. She almost didn't believe me, but I still felt as though nothing was going to happen. So at the last minute, when the transportation pulled up to the some hotel, the Atlantis Hotel in Nassau, wasn't my hotel. I didn't know what to do, but I felt as though this person was going to get away with something. I ran off the bus, told the bus driver to hold on to me, and I went and told the concierge. And I don't know what would have happened. You know, I don't know if I did enough, but I felt as though at least I told the concierge at that hotel and pointed him out and said, you need to watch this person, because God forbid this person is at the beach with kids, you know, and bathing suits around. So I kind of feel as though we have to say more to protect other people as well. That's my comment.
Question in the back. Oh.
Thanks. Let's see. Over the summer, I was the victim of kind of a distressing harassment on a Metro North train. And I came here tonight sort of hoping to feel empowered. And right now I'm feeling kind of distressed because, I mean, just for example, to see that map of DC with all the pinpoints on it, I don't think I'd feel comforted if DC were my city seeing that map. And so I'm just trying to like reconcile how to come away with this with, I mean, I really like that I would feel like a badass reporting someone on this website, but I'm trying to kind of come up with a way to sort of make peace with all of this. And the other part of it is that I was wondering if you partner with any law, police action, because I'm sure that by having maps, you can kind of see where repeat offenders are. And I just wanted to know if that was a next step in your plan.
Yeah, we normally, when we do these presentations, we also do like a 30-minute presentation on the aspects of not how to intervene as a bystander, and or if you are being harassed, how to address the harasser. So we try to end in an empowering way by kind of giving people skills and just tools in your toolbox, because oftentimes we feel, you know, even if you don't feel like addressing harassment, like all of us don't always feel like addressing harassment, we still have something to think back on and be like, oh yeah, I can say X, Y, and Z. And so one of the things that we are working with the police, and they do read our blog. And kind of the cool thing about it is that a lot of people have submitted experiences to us, and we are not really tying ourselves closely to the criminal justice system because for a variety of philosophical reasons we don't believe in the criminal justice system. But that doesn't mean that we're not allowing people to clearly share their experiences and report their experiences to the transit police. But what makes DC so challenging is that there's transit police, then there's local police, so DC, Maryland, Virginia police who may get involved and may not get involved for a variety of different reasons.
And then we have the park police, too.
Yeah, then we have the park police and the FBI. And so we have a lot of law enforcement in D.C., like tons of law enforcement, which is one of the reasons, like, overall why so many of crimes are not solved in D.C. because of the people not wanting to step on each other's toes and then no movement being done. But they do. We've gotten a lot of, okay, not a lot, but there's been a few experiences that police have read our blog and then have worked with the survivor of that experience to arrest the individual. And one of them was a recent one in Arlington, a popular metro stop where an individual was upskirted and she felt so distressed and then, was crying. Nobody talked to her. Nobody said anything. Somebody was like, just blow it off. It's not a big deal. And she's like, you don't understand. Somebody just took a picture of me without my consent. Like, that's not cool. And then he laughed. The harasser laughed at her. And she went and reported it to the Metro police, the Metro operator. And she's like, this guy, that's his MO. That's what he does all the time. He hangs out at the metro station and does this. So she knew, transit authority knew about this harasser and didn't do anything about it. The next day, because that was her ride to work and the only metro stop closest to her, she saw him on the escalator and took a picture of him. And that picture she sent it to us. It got uploaded. Arlington Police Department got involved. And then all of these women who have been harassed by the same guy came out. And this is one of like 5 stories that we have received where the police have gotten involved. And simply just through this online usage of camera, plus experiences, plus comments, plus tweeting about it, allowed people to recognize that there is a perpetrator in this metro stop and we need to do something about it and not allow this type of harassment to continue. And so there are those success stories, but you're right, this is a distressful thing because there is no one solution to it. And that's, it depends on who you are. It depends on how you want to address it. It depends on your individual scenario that you're in, whether you're in an abandoned part of Brooklyn or whether you're in a crowded train. Regardless, you still may feel not empowered to do anything. And so, I hope that you walk away from here feeling like there are outlets out there and there's movement to do something around it and that you can be part of it and can address it and that there's not one solution to it and there's not one bandage, but we're trying to figure out how do we do all of these pieces without silencing people and without continuing what has been happening for so long. So I thank you for being so genuine about how you feel because we really appreciate that. But what you feel is exactly how we all have felt throughout and continue to feel like this is so messed up. We see our map and those are all the places that we live and we love. But what do? How do you address it?
Through the New Yorkers for Safe Transit Coalition, we are organizing survivors to have a survivor-led advisory board called the Transit Justice Collective. And we really hope that survivor voices and experiences will help shape this movement because there really is there can be a tendency to really isolate folks. It's like, well, sorry that happened to you, but we're going to go over here and do this program. We really want voices and experiences to inform this work, and we truly believe that this is very much, from the ground up. And I also have, many days where I'm disempowered. I'm just like, wow, I just the weight of the world and the weight of this work really bears down. But I take heart in not only my sisters up here, but all of you out there, because you are doing your own work in each day in small and large ways. And you may not recognize it, but you really are. And I do encourage you to find a way of plugging in, whether it's talking with your friends and family, or perhaps learning about how you can volunteer with different organizations, or whether you can start movements like a Transit Justice Collective to address these issues in ways that resonate with you.
And let's face it, you guys are hauling back, and the world is listening. All right, we've got a never before done city council hearing on street harassment right here in this city. We've got anti-harassment ads that are up in the subway. The issue of street harassment and the Hollaback movement has been addressed on Fox.com, CNN, MSNBC, NPR multiple times. So people are listening. This isn't like, it's not, we're just in the beginning, and that's why it's so scary, and that's why that map looks so incredibly awful. But in 10 years, if we take a snapshot of that map, it's not going to look like that, because we're not going to let it look like that. But we have to come forward, we have to tell our stories, and we have to look for ways to address this.
No, I mean, our goal eventually is to work with, council members in the neighborhoods that we especially see having a lot of harassment, but we are just on the cusp of making those connections and figuring out who to talk to, especially with the election coming up. That's going to change, so we're kind of holding off on that. But we do know from past connections that we've had in the mayor's office that there is some interest in there. So we do hope to do some more legislative work. We especially want to work with the public transportation, that on working with them on their policies and changing how they operate and how they deal with public sexual harassment. We've actually, every time there's like an open forum to ask the chair questions, we always submit a question about public sexual harassment. And we say, you said before that you're dealing with this, but we know from our blog that you're not. And their answer is always the same, that, if someone experiences this, they can call this number and we'll deal with it. So we know, though, that they're not. So we're just starting to figure out how we're going to address those, but we do hope so. And to answer your question about the documentary, there actually have been some folks in the past that have done documentaries starting in the 80s. There was
Maggie Hadley West, right. War Zone.
Yeah.
Maggie Hadley West, War Zone.
And now there's two women that are working on a documentary called Back Up. Mm-hmm. And I don't believe they finished. They're still filming. But if you Google it, they definitely have clips on YouTube. Other than that, I don't know of any other documentaries. Back Up.
And there's also Girls for Gender Equity, based here in Brooklyn, did a really fantastic documentary with their Sisters in Strength program called Hey Shorty, and it is looking at harassment in Bed-Stuy communities. And actually Mandy has co-written a book with the folks from GGE that's coming out sometime next year, also called Hey Shorty. So looking at the prevalence of sexual harassment in communities of color.
And just to replug this Transit Justice Collective, I'm actually doing a lot of the policy work with New Yorkers for Safe Transit. It's nyfst.org. If you're interested in this policy change work, we're looking at a couple of different bills to make it transparent, the extent to which harassment and assault happens on the New York City subway system, and we would love your help.
Good evening. My question was, I just wanted clarification. But what I've taken thus far is that maybe silence isn't the right answer or the appropriate answer. And in my personal experience, just in going with my gut, sometimes I'm like, he looks a little crazy. I'm not going to say anything. And I think as a personal choice, that's very empowering because I'm not going to engage him. And then other times it's like, I have to curse him out this time because this is just really, really out of control. So I just wanted, maybe I interpreted it wrong, but I think that silence is a choice and that sometimes it's the best response that you can give.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Definitely. And silence is okay. I mean, we don't respond to every harasser that we come across. Like, there are so many times when, even though I work on Hollaback DC and it's like my life, like, I don't even want to bother with it. I'm just going to keep going. I'd prefer to ignore it right now, and that's okay. Like, any response you have is okay because it's not your fault. So definitely don't ever feel that way.
And we've gotten experiences where people send in, I didn't respond, but this is what happened to me.
Yeah, exactly. Just because you were silent in the moment doesn't mean you still can't holla back.
I first heard about your organization a couple of years ago, I think it was. It was on a Channel 11 news report. I remember it was a Saturday night, 10 p.m. Newscast, and they referenced the fact that you were getting cell phone photos from harassers using what the reporters defined as threatening, lurid looks as one of their methods of harassment. So my first question is, and I'm researching this, my first question is, do you have an archive on the website of harassers using sexually aggressive stares or leers as part of their harassment routine? Do you have a collection of photos of that kind?
Yeah, yes, but we don't have it categorized as such, so you'd have to go through it by hand.
And my second question is this. Have you found that the use of cell phone cameras has impacted workplace harassment to any extent over the last couple of years? Are there any statistics or or is there any data on that?
We got a whole lot of nothing when it comes to data on street harassment. It's not entirely true. There's obviously the data that our own organizations are collecting, and there's data in the book from Holly Curl, and there's a few little things out here and there, but a study that robust doesn't exist. What I will tell you is that, as feminists, we have addressed workplace harassment. We've addressed harassment that happens in the school in the form of bullying, which is a big conversation that's happening now. And what makes street harassment so different and what's made it so, taken us so long to address isn't the fact that it hurts any less than those other forms of harassment. It's the fact that we haven't had a way to do it. So, for example, taking a photo of the guy that harasses you at the soda machine, isn't really necessary because you know exactly who it is, and you have a different route to report it. Whereas I think that, with street harassment, when somebody is sort of in passing, particularly if you're looking to report them to the police, it can be a helpful tool.
I wouldn't underestimate I wouldn't underestimate its value in the workplace, though, because you may know who it is and you may know to whom you can talk, but you may not always be believed. And that's why I think it would be massively amazing if women started toting these cameras around the workplace and using them in situations like this, because there's always a question of, did you interpret him correctly? Did you misinterpret him? And if you don't get sexually explicit language out of the harasser, and sometimes you don't, if they're using a combination of innuendo and nonverbal projecting, picture is very, very useful. I wish I'd had one in my harassment situation. So
maybe you can start a hollaback in your workplace.
That would be a very powerful thing to do. Yeah.
Let's
Thank
take
you.
a couple more questions, and then I'm sure the panelists will talk informally after.
Hi, my name is Jadira. I'm also training to be a rape counselor at St. Luke's, and I also work in Washington Heights, so I do see all this harassment, and I'm being educated about everything going on. I just wanted to thank you for being here. I didn't know about your organizations, and to add to your success stories, I was walking home from my internship in Washington Heights, and I was being harassed, and then this other guy actually stopped the guy behind me and said, "That's not how you talk to a woman. You let her, leave her alone." And I thanked him and kept it walking.
Awesome.
And not to put my boyfriend on blast, but just talking about it and raising the issues, just as you have, just as yourself and many other women, it does educate men. And my boyfriend now, he's part of a young men's peer internship group, and these are situations he talks about, and he tells them exactly how I feel about this. So just what you've done, what everyone in their power has tried to really stop. I think it's wonderful.
When I came to Barnard about 32 years ago, I was getting harassed maybe 5 to 10 times a day in this neighborhood, which was very different than the neighborhood it is today. And I noticed a almost direct correlation between volunteering and getting involved in women's issues and the decline of that harassment. And I wondered, Ms. May, about what you were saying earlier, about how do you explain how that happens?
Yeah.
It's an interesting phenomenon.
I think it is too. You know, I don't really have a really good explanation for it, but I do think I started to walk down the street a little differently when I had a response. And I started to feel like I owned it instead of like it owned me. And I think that, you know, whether that comes from Hollaback or whether it comes from, you know, the work that you were doing, I think that's a very real thing. And you know, and there's been studies, you know, that about sort of the way you carry yourself. But I think that it's a slippery slope to say that if you carry yourself in an insecure way that you're more likely to get harassed. I don't think that that's true at all. I think that people get harassed in all kinds of different situations. But maybe it's something in the air. Maybe it's your energy. Maybe you just feel a little more badass that day.
Secondary victimization is really well known, right? So you have an incident, you report it to the MTA officer or the police officer, and they don't listen to you or they don't take it seriously. But I noticed a few stories on the Hollaback website where people were actually reporting the lack of response by officers, by MTA people. And that seemed kind of like a secondary Hollaback to me. And it seemed really effective when you're talking about, you know, a media campaign and publicity. So I was just wondering if you had any intentions of expanding to include that or explicitly eliciting those things.
Let's see if I can try to answer that. Through the work with New Yorkers for Safe Transit, one of our partners, one of our coalition members is the Transport Workers Local 100, comprised of many station agents. And what we're really learning is that, you know, prior to that partnership, you know, me as an individual, a member of the riding public, you know, take the subway and there's some station agents, and even in trying to report my own case of being groped in the subway, and not having that not really finding anyone to report it to, it absolutely was, you know, very, very disheartening. But on the flip side, I have now learned how equally disempowering it is to be a station agent and how the MTA policies and procedures really prevent them from taking action. Almost, I mean, at pretty much with the threat of their own job. In 2005, a woman was assaulted in front of a station agent, and he was mandated by policy to not leave the booth. You know, granted, there was many other things that he could have done, but his only option was to call station command, which then called the NYPD. You know, it was essentially like a 10-minute response time, and the perpetrator got away. It's just it's very disheartening to learn how disempowered folks are in their own jobs, and we certainly want to shift policies so that it can be much more equitable for both the station agent who wants to take action but is currently prevented from doing so, and for those of us who are experiencing this on a daily basis, whether as individuals or as bystanders, in order to help, you know, change the system.
And I think there's a lot. I mean, you're talking about bystanders, and there's a lot that bystanders can do to make things better. You know, we are in the process of trying to figure out and run a Holla Hero campaign because everybody wants to be a hero. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but you know, you're absolutely right. There is sort of this re-traumatization, and in New York City, it's like, oh my gosh, I really have somewhere to go. I'm going to pretend like I didn't see that, and maybe those other 15 people behind me will address it. But I think that we can all stand up and even if all we do is be like, hey, are you okay? I saw him just say that to you. Or I saw him just touch you, or I saw that just happen to you. I think that could go a long way to making us feel like we're part of a larger community and not just an alienating city.
Great. And we're trying to kind of do like a blacklist of all the people that are horrible out there, like metro station, and this is kind of the issue about being a nonprofit and being kind of like, how do you kind of tote that line? But we've gotten a lot of folks at our community education forums talking about businesses like bars and restaurants that like don't do anything when you talk about harassment. And so, you know, we realize that they're also part of our community. So how do we train bars to address this issue? And then if you don't address it, let's put you on a list that say that you don't address this issue, you know, and like kind of like start blacklisting organizations or agencies and folks that really are not taking our issues seriously. But in the next day or so, there's a viral video right now of a law enforcement officer doing really horrible things to an individual in DC that we're going to post just, again, to put transit police on notice that what they do, we're not going to allow them to do that anymore. And so those things are just, we want to do stuff like this because it's so important to put people on notice that we're not going to take this anymore. And we shouldn't have been taking it in the first place, but we did. And now we're not. And how do we, again, use technology for good?
Well, thank you to the audience for wonderful questions and discussion, and thank you again to the panelists for a terrific evening. Thank you.